This is the Through Theology in a Year broadcast that I'm doing. So keep on doing your Through the Bible in a Year. Everybody does Through the Bible in the Year, but let's do Through Theology in a Year this time. It's 30 minutes each day. That's all you have to take. Let's go from very beginning to very end, all the way through theology. We're on our 12th lesson right now, and this is called the Systematic Theologian as the Chief of Medicine. We're continuing our Categories of Theology that we started last time, and we've got a lot to say about Categories of Theology. I love Categories of Theology. It builds into something we're going to talk about later on that is so incredibly important, which is called Sources of Theology, and I'm going to try to cover this without getting too much into that, because I want to keep them a bit separate for now, but I am going to relate them some this time. And as you'll see, if you've been through the theology program, which is my 60-course or 60-session, 6-course trek through all of systematic theology that you can start in your church, that you can go through on a formal basis, that has homework, that has workbooks, that has all kinds of stuff that goes along with this. This is what that's what I'm updating right now. And for those of you who teach this in your church, I think this would be a really, really good. Those of you who teach the theology program in your church or your small groups, or you use it, I think that this would be really good for those of you who are leaders or teachers using the PowerPoints or just watching the video and then going through it afterwards. This would be really good, because obviously what we are doing here through Theology in a Year is more extensive. That we're slowing down, we're putting on the brakes, we're talking about what needs to be talked about. And like I said, it's been 20 years since I've done it, so I've got a lot more to say, and this helps me to kind of essentialize those things that I want to say and change what I need to change. I haven't changed much. Theology doesn't change. That's a nice thing. You can go back and look at systematic theologies from 500 years ago, and it doesn't change much. 1,000 years ago doesn't change much. Theology doesn't change. Sometimes the way it practically impacts our life and our culture, that changes. Sometimes the illustrations change, and just how we update it, and we do learn. We do learn through the different sources that we have for theology, but it doesn't change. Essentially, it doesn't change. So that is the nice thing about going through something like this, is I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about, hey, there's going to be I might change in my beliefs some. There's nothing really essential that I've changed in the last 20 years. I wish there would be. I wish I would change something, because at least that would keep me intellectually honest to you guys, and you guys would see, oh, he's changing, he's updating, he's changed with regard to. There are some things I've massaged a lot, but nothing I've really changed. I'm still the same as I was back then. But as we go through this is something where I am trying to teach you across the board what different positions in theology, and give arguments for every position. This is called the Elliptic method of teaching, or the Elliptic method of theology. Probably a new word to most of you guys, unless you have Francis Turretin's Elliptic theology that was written a few hundred years ago. But it's basically given the position, given the arguments for it, and then given the objections against it, and then giving alternative positions and doing the exact same thing. So that's what we're doing as we go through this. We're talking about Systematic Theologian as the Chief of Medicine. This is where we are at. And let's go ahead and give a quick review of what we talked about last time. We didn't talk about, I introduced the subject. I went through the different categories of theology. And we talked about systematic theology, biblical theology, historical theology, philosophical theology, creedal and dogmatic theology, and apologetic theology. These are the 6 kind of primary categories that I am teaching and I am referring to. That now, as you'll see, I'm gonna massage these next. I'm gonna talk about them in a different way. But here's what I wanted you to see: these categories of theology are 6 different categories that you may see in a seminary. If you go to a seminary, place where you get trained for going into the pastorate or becoming a teacher in theology, a teacher at a university, a teacher at another seminary, these are the different departments that you'll enter into. I myself, I majored in New Testament theology. Might surprise you. New Testament exegesis, New Testament Greek. That was my major through seminary. I had to take all of the systematic theology classes. I had to take every class on every book of the Bible. I took one apologetics class. The seminary I went to, Dallas Seminary, wasn't really big, at least at the time, in philosophical or apologetic theology. But it may surprise you that I didn't study systematic theology because that's primarily what I teach. And one of the reasons, of course I love the New Testament, I really do, and I wanted to learn Greek. I wanted to get into the forest because I had been in the trees. I wanted to get into the trees. I wanted to get into the leaves of the trees, and because I had been into systematic theology since I started, getting really excited about God and wanting to study. And so systematic theology was my life, and it's what I knew a lot of already whenever I went into seminary. And so I tried to get to the point that I thought not so much was the weakest, although it was weak whenever I went into New Testament Greek. I had only taken a couple of years, but that I thought was probably the most essential for building my entire systematic theology. And so that's the reason why I studied New Testament Greek. So I was in the biblical studies department at the seminary. And this is what you'll find. You'll find these different departments. And as you go through these, you'll find different people that, different teachers, different professors that focus on each one of these. Now let's look at this from the standpoint of the systematic theologian as the chief of medicine. This is something that I've been writing on some, as you can see over here in my, and let's see if I can bring this up, over here, and this is my Patreon, and on my Patreon, if you are familiar with my blog, this is kind of my blog that I write to my supporters. So I still do the Credo House blog, but my Patreon blog is, let's see here, Categories. My Patreon blog, I write a lot more. So you'll see all the classes that I put on here. But right here, I have the Systematic Theologian as the chief of medicine, an analogy to understanding the theological academics. And I wrote on this, you can see, I wrote an introduction to this, and this is what we're going to do, is we're going to kind of expand on this introduction. So let us go back to the PowerPoint. And look at this. This is a hospital, I guess. Don't look too closely. It is AI that I had draw this after I described what I wanted, and AI is not very good at spelling. After all it can do, after the amazing things it can do, it cannot spell. Why? Now, you may be watching this 20 years later, and it can spell perfectly. Just remember, this is back in the day whenever we were very archaic in our technology, and AI could not spell in pictures whenever it drew a picture out for you. But that's what it is, so don't look too closely at these. But that's a hospital, and it's comparing a hospital to the departments of a hospital to the departments of of theology. And so I want you to see it with regard to that, because I think it's going to be helpful for you. I really do. Okay, so let's go over here. That's another picture. Still not spelled right. As you can see, systematic theology. That is not a new theology. Neither is pielectic. That sounds like something. The Dialectic Theologian. Okay, that's not the Thessalonians' way of doing theology. I don't know, but that's another way to look at it. See, you got the hospital there. Now let's move on to this, and let's look at this from the standpoint of comparing the theology departments to the medical departments. Notice here, you've got the biblical, and listen, this is the best I could do. This is not perfect. No analogy is perfect. Just hang with me. There's maybe different ways that you could think of it, and I'm glad. I want you to think of it, be creative, but you'll be able to see what I'm trying to get at, because I think it is very helpful for understanding systematic theology, because ultimately that's what I want you to do, is understand systematic theology. As you can see right here, I do not have systematic theology on this yet. You'll see why in just a moment. All I've got is these. I've also added a couple of more. As you can see, biblical, historic, philosophical, and apologetic are there. I don't have the creedal or dogmatic, but that can kind of be shuffled in with the historic. But then I have a couple extra ones, biblical counselor and practical theologian. And those are very close. The biblical counselor, practical theologian. The biblical counselor does practical theology, so does the pastor. So pastoral ministries, you might look at it as one department. But just stick with this one for now. I'll walk you through it. So you have the biblical theologian. How is the biblical theologian compared in the medical department? Kind of a general, think of it as a general surgeon. And this will become more clear as we move on. What is the historic theologian? That is the epidemiologist. Now notice here, you have the general surgeons. They can kind of do pretty much anything across the board, but specific to surgery. And then you have the historic theologian. In the medical department, you would have them as studying diseases. I think that's what an epidemiologist is. I'm not really good at this. This is the best I could do. Me and AI worked it out together for a while, so I don't know a whole lot about medicine, but I think I'm right here. So they'd be studying the past diseases, or maybe even just kind of the history of medicine. I'm not sure if that's what it does, but think of it that way. Looking into the history of medicine in a hospital, that's the department they'd be working in. And then the philosophical theologian would be the neurologist, notice, because they work on the mind, right? Not perfect, but works. The apologetic theologian, kind of an emergency room doctor. That's what you would have there, because the apologetic theologian is dealing with kind of hands-on, not so much emergencies in theology, but things you have to deal with on a daily basis that have a little bit more of a confrontation to them. A little bit more. You have to be quick on your feet. You have to be able to. You have to be able to answer a whole lot of questions. You have to be able to do a whole lot of things as a ER doctor. You're not just focused on one area of the body. You're focused on everything, kind of an emergency way. And then you have the biblical counselor, who is the psychiatrist or the psychologist. Get it? It makes sense, right? A practical theologian would be the physical therapist. And the reason why I have that is because as the practical theologian, you're dealing with what people are doing every day, getting them ready for real life. And so as you can see here, this is not really so much what I want you to see as it is what's next. What's next is the really important part, because I want you to see systematic theology as something broader than just one person. Sometimes people define systematic theology as how you go through the Bible and you put every category, such as Christ, Christology, or the Holy Spirit, pneumatology, or the end times, eschatology. What does the Bible have to say about each one of these areas? That's sometimes what it is looked at as. And so basically all you're doing is dividing up what the Bible says, and you're focusing on one source, the Bible. And while the Bible, as we move forward, may become the most important source, it is not the only source. It is not the only thing. It's kind of like surgery being the only thing you do at a hospital. That's not it. It may be the most important thing in some ways. I mean, I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying if you could think of it that way. Just like the Bible would be the most important resource that we have, it is not the only resource God has given to us for doing theology. Now, what does the systematic theologian do? How does the systematic theologian work through this? Well, the systematic theologian, well, first of all, let me go through and talk about some examples, and maybe this will help you a little bit more to understand what I mean by each one of these and the departments. You'll have different people, like I said, that focus on different areas. Like this course right here would be more of a systematic theology course, which I haven't compared yet to the hospital. But there's people who specialize in different areas. So you have, say, the biblical theologian. You might have Michael Heiser represented there, or N.T. Wright, or Richard Bauckham, who focus on biblical theology, say, of the Old Testament or of the New Testament. In the biblical theology department, what I'm talking about here, you might even be able to include the exegetes, the people who New Testament Greek, Old Testament Hebrew, and focus on individual books of the Bible. The historic theologians, who would that be? Well, you may have heard of Justo Gonzalez or Mark Knoll or Alistair McGrath. They are really, really good at historic theology. That's what they focus on. Doesn't mean they don't know their New Testament, doesn't mean they don't know their Old Testament, but normally you specialize in a certain area, just like you do at a hospital. You choose a specialization. Then you have the philosophical theologians. Who are those? Well, J.P. Moreland would be a great example of a philosophical theologian. So would William Lane Craig or Alvin Plantinga. Those are all, Alvin Plantinga is probably the most precise of all of those, of being a philosophical theologian that focuses on philosophical theology. But usually there's a lot of overlap. You've got overlap between philosophical theology and the apologetic theologian. Who would those people be? Those people would be somebody like, I just tried to put a little bit more popular ones up here, like Lee Strobel or Frank Turek. Although Gary Habermas would also be considered an apologetic theologian. And he's also one that I doubt would claim to be a philosophical theologian. Just like William Lane Craig could be a philosophical and apologetic. So could J.P. Moreland. And in a lot of ways, Alvin Plantinga does this as well. He dabbles in apologetics. But Gary Habermas probably wouldn't think of himself. I know Gary, and I think he would probably laugh at saying he's a philosopher. No, he does do philosophy. He does. Don't get me wrong. He does. He's actually the head of I think Liberty University whenever it comes to philosophy. But he's still mainly apologetics, and mainly apologetics in a focused area such as focused area which you probably know him for, which is the resurrection of Christ. He focuses in, he takes an even more precise department within the theology hospital and only deals with the resurrection. Although that's not only, I mean, he does do some things with near-death experiences and some other things, but mainly you know him for the resurrection. He's the best resurrection scholar in the world. He's the best. He's at the best. I mean, any hospital, any theological hospital would want to hire him and let their hospital be known as the one who has the resurrection scholar, the resurrection doctor, Gary Habermas. So you got a biblical counselor. You might have heard of some of these at least in theology, the world of theology, are a little bit less known, but there's some biblical counselors that are well known, like Ed Welch, Wayne Mack, or Winston Smith. And then you also have practical theologians. You've probably heard of Eugene Peterson, at least from The Message, maybe Howard Hendricks from Dallas Theological Seminary, or Dallas Willard. How do they work? They work by very practical, real world stuff, and they would be considered theologians. So you see the picture? You see the picture here? Now keep it with regard to a hospital. If we could go back to the hospital metaphor, you've got all these different departments in the hospital, all these different specializations. Sometimes they zero in even more, like I said, with Gary Habermas and the resurrection, or say J.P. Moreland and his focus on the dualism and the mind-body problem, and Old Testament theologians that focus in on just the Old Testament. People like N.T. Wright focuses mainly on the New Testament, that kind of stuff. And then exegetes. So you got all these departments and these sub-departments within the hospital. So that's great. You have everything, right? But what is a systematic theologian with regard to all this we've talked about here? What is this? How would you define the systematic theologian? Now, you know probably from the name of this what I'm going to do, but I hope it makes sense, because it's really important for you to understand what we're doing with systematic theology and how this works. What this through theology in a year is all about, because this is a systematic through theology in a year. What does that look like? Well, let's go back over here and let's take it to the next one. The systematic theologian here is kind of the umbrella under which all the other departments fit. That's why I call it the chief of medicine. Now, I think I'm okay with this, the chief of medicine. Now, this is probably a little bit embarrassing for me to say, but I used to watch Grey's Anatomy until it just got so bad. All my girls loved it. My sister loved it. They all made me watch it. That's my excuse. They made me watch it. Okay, but that's where I learned a lot about being in a hospital. My daughter, who grew up watching Grey's Anatomy, she is now at a hospital, and she learned a lot from that show. And she said it's fairly accurate as far as the representation of what people do. Now, there's lots of doctor shows. I watched House MD. He was what was he? He diagnostician. Is that what it's called? The guy who studies people's diseases and or I don't know. He diagnoses. He's just really, really good at diagnosing. That's a specific type of department as well. But whenever you go to the hospital, who is kind of over it all, somebody that should be able to do everything, at least to some degree, somebody who should know what's going on in every department, somebody who should know how to step in, at least for a time, in any, maybe this is wrong, maybe I'm wrong about this, but should be able to step into any one of the departments and do their job at least sufficiently well, that's the chief of medicine, right? Over the entire hospital. And I'm not trying to say that the systematic theologian is the very best. It just, as a systematic theologian, everybody needs to be a systematic theologian, even if you are focused in on one department. You need to be able to back up and see the whole. The systematic theologian is kind of the broadest perspective that you can have of it all. And it doesn't mean you're a specialist in any in systematic theology, although there are people who are specialists in systematic theology. But it's hard, because in order to be a real specialist as a chief of medicine, you're probably also going to have another department. You're probably also going to be a real good brain surgeon or a real good foot doctor or something like that, but you also have it all. You may be specifically trained in one area or another, but maybe you're you're trained in systematic theology. Maybe that was your goal, is just to see the big picture. My point is this, is that no matter where you're at, you've got to be able to see the big picture to understand what's going on all the little areas. And so at some point you have to do a systematic theology. whether that is your field, whether it's the thing that you're focused on, whether it's the thing you like. And just like doctors who go to hospitals, there's reasons why, there's giftedness they have in each one of their areas. And they find that giftedness, zero in on it, and that's where they're best at for the rest of their lives. But you should be able to see the big picture. You should be able to see where your part fits into the whole, and you ought to be able to see a whole and kind of have the entire thing made out in your mind. Have this umbrella mentality. So when we go through this entire systematic theology, we're going to be resourcing every single area. It's not as if I'm just going to focus in on one area, and that includes going back to the pastoral, the practical, the biblical counselor, those kind of things. And I'll relate that later on in the class. It's very important, and you'll see why, and you'll see how this fits together in another way later on. But what if we get to sources of theology? All the different sources that we have for theology. So keep that in mind. Keep all of this in mind in this theology department, the big picture theology department. Now, I've got a few resources over here. I got so many of them. I tried to grab a representative, and so let me just start showing these to you, and we'll see how far I go with this. But let me first get, here is Wayne Grudem. Wayne Grudem, Systematic Theology. This is by far and away the most popular systematic theology book out there. I didn't say it's the best. I actually do think it's the best because of the simplicity, how easy it is to read. It's not necessarily that I think you will agree with it or I agree with it all the time, but I happen to for 90% of the time, but Wayne Grudem did a very, very good job of writing this, and it's the most popular, therefore it's also going to get the most hate. You know that. Everything that is the most popular always gets the most hate. People like to be esoteric and be kind of, here's the one I like, and it's something somebody else doesn't know about, and it's cool because it's kind of like songs, A song gets too popular, and then all of a sudden everybody hates it. And then they go off to kind of these fringe songs and stuff, and those are the cool ones. Well, I know there's cooler theologians than Wayne Grudem because of his popularity, but it's a really good theology. It really is. Mosaic of Christian Belief. These are both the books that we use if you were to take this formally and go through the theology program. That's what it's called, the theology program. Not too creative, I know, but it is the theology program, not a theology program, but the. So if you're looking for the theology program, go to credocourses.com, and you can find it there. You can get it on downloads. You can get it on a little disc, or just like this. You can get it all, the entire course, all the workbooks, all the PowerPoints, all the quizzes, everything on something like this. So go to credocourses.com. Search for the theology program. You can get the hardback workbook, so you have it and you can write it. A lot of people like me like to write down. Don't like the digital stuff that much, like real books, but some of you don't. I'm not saying it's better that way. Here. Let me give just a few more examples. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to get through as much as I wanted to, and so I'm just grabbing the first pile that I set up here, so this doesn't mean it is the most important pile. So let's go to here. I thought this was a good example of a specific type of historic theologian, an epidemiologist, if we can keep it going that way. But this is a great book on just studying the Council of Nicaea. I love the councils of the church. I've got 10 books over here just on the 7 ecumenical councils of the church, and then some that goes even beyond that within the 21 Roman Catholic ecumenical councils. But this is a great book that is edited by young Richard Kim, with a lot of different articles exploring the Council of Nicaea in 325, a very specific time in church history, and will help you to understand why it matters. Here is Reformed Dogmatics by Herman Banvik. This is a very good series if you are wanting to understand Reformed dogmatics. Dogmatics doesn't mean what you probably think it does, because if you're dogmatic today, it means you're closed-minded. That's not what it meant back then. It just meant things we believe that are official in the Reformed Church. So if you're a Reformed theologian and you want to understand the Reformation and their theology, there's a good book to focus in on that. Here is Jaroslav Pelikan, and this is his, I think it's five-book series on the history of the, this is the history of, not the history of the church, but it's the history of doctrine. So a little bit different. You got histories of the church, which I'm not going to reach over there and get. We get lots of histories of the church, but we also got histories of doctrine. This is the greatest guy in the world to get. He really is. He's so good. I think he converted to Eastern Orthodoxy right before he died in his 80s. I think he was Anglican for most of his life. Very interesting, but great history. This is a new one I just got. Reformed Systematic Theology. I don't mean to pull out all these Reformed books, but that's a new one I just got, so I haven't really been able to get into it much. Let me give a good Arminian representation. Not that Arminians aren't necessarily Reformed. I'm sorry, I'm saying too much. There's just too much I'm throwing out here. But Thomas Oden, there's nobody better than this guy, really. I mean, just a kind-hearted soul. He was from Oklahoma, and you don't understand how much he did for the church and what all he did for church history. Didn't agree with them theologically in some areas, but God, he loved Christ, and he just. I showed up at his doorstep whenever he moved back to Oklahoma. It was very embarrassing, but I got so excited whenever I found out that he moved back to Oklahoma. I never met the guy. He didn't know me from Adam. And he comes back here, and he's finishing his magnum opus on a commentary from all the early church fathers. And he's trying to get this done. And I hear he's in Oklahoma, and so I get excited. And I thought he might want to come see the Credo House because it's very historic. So I looked him up on Google Maps, and I found his house, and I'm like, I know exactly where that is. And I literally drove to his house, parked in the circle driveway, or the cul-de-sac, and just walked up to his house, and I was like, what? How stupid am I? I'm just walking up to this guy's house. He's going to think I'm crazy. And I did. I went ahead and did it. And I knocked on his door, and a girl, I don't know why I'm telling you this whole story. It's just a funny story. But his nurse, because he was very, very old, his nurse came to the door and was like, yes, can I help you? I was like, yeah, I'm Michael Patton, and is Thomas Oden here? And she goes, yeah, what's this concerning? I go, oh, I'm a pastor. I don't know why that came out. Like that was going to do anything. Oh, I'm a pastor. I'm a crazy pastor, right? And she said, hold on. And he came out, and I sat down with the guy for an hour and a half, and I have never, ever met such a kind soul, or very rarely. I don't want to over-exaggerate, but he really was. Those of you who knew him, incredible. He died about 10 years ago, but and he ended up signing a copy of his book, coming to the Credo House. I mean, it was just a great deal. I was so glad I got to meet him before he died. But there's just all kinds. I don't know. I mean, here I'll show you my this is my favorite systematic theology. No, it's not. Well, I like Pannenberg's systematic theology. It's really good. It doesn't agree with me theologically, but methodologically, I love the way he approaches things. I love the questions he asks and how he goes about it. Richard Muller, Reformed Dogmatics. Lots of Reformed stuff. I'm sorry. I don't mean to do that. I got Francis. I was going to show you Louis Ferry Schaeffer, Charles Ryrie, both great dispensational theologians. I was going to show you, I don't know, Berkhoff. That's another systematic. That's another Reformed theologian. I don't know. I just get excited whenever I start talking about this. But all of these represent, like, here's a book on the guy wrote on how to, how the eye works, or here's a book on how the history of medicine has gone from 1300 to 1700. You see what I'm saying? It's just, you can focus, you can see it in that way. But Systematic Theologian, let's leave with this, because I know I'm out of time. The Systematic Theologian is the broad umbrella that sees all of these departments and puts them together in a coherent whole, to see how they work together, to make sure that you're and the reason why I'm calling on you to be a systematic theologian, to be a chief of surgery, is because you want to have, to the best of your ability, a consistent theology. You want to have a consistent whole. You want to have a theological worldview that takes into account all the different body parts of theology. So that's it. For today, we're gonna have to wrap it up for today. I'm sorry, too much stuff, too much exciting stuff. This is just so great. I'm so glad you guys are with me. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for hanging out. This is too much fun. Keep on coming back. We're gonna go through all of systematic theology. If you guys want, go to my Patreon. Greatest way to support me right now is through Patreon. $3 a month. And you know what? Listen to this. At different levels, up to $25 a month, you will get every course that we have ever done. And let me tell you something, we have done a lot. And you'll get all the theology program. If you sign up for $25 a month, you'll get all of our courses, every theology program, and be able to have them immediately accessible. You can start it in your church and do all the stuff that I've been talking about here. But for $3 a month, you get access to the entire Patreon. I got a lot that I've written on there. Okay, what else? That's it for now. We'll see you tomorrow, and we're going to keep on pushing our way through all of Prolegomena, which is the first class in systematic theology. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.